I guess we'll wrap up here pretty quick, but I've got, I think, one or two more questions I want. For number one, Congress and I believe one of the courts has already said, FCC, cut it out. You guys have no right to meddle in this area. And now there's talk of retitling the internet, bringing it under the Telecommunications Act or phones, rather than leaving it under the internet part where it is, or whatever part it's under right now. That's really going to put some very old rules, and you talked about this in your speech a little bit last night. So just kind of give a brief overview of what you said last night about implementing, what was it, 1930 Ma Bell rules on the internet.
Exactly. So back in April, a court struck down the FCC for trying to use one part of the statute, and not to get too technical, but what we call Title I. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of a general authority, but that general authority has to be tied to a specific authority elsewhere in that Act of 1934, which you point out. So
there was no internet in 1934.
I don't think so. Yeah, it was those cranky old phones that were voice only and really scratchy and really expensive and couldn't provide much functionality. So the 1934 Act, so that's Title II, Common Carriage is what it was called. And actually those rules were almost carbon copies of the railroad monopoly regulations from the 1880s. So we're really looking at imposing 19th century regulations on 21st century technologies that are much more complex and completely different. So there's a big concern there. I think that will fail in court ultimately, but you're absolutely right. By last count, I think 301 members of Congress, a large bipartisan majority of Congress has written to the FCC and told them to stop going down this path. Now, for all the people listening, when was the last time you heard the terms large bipartisan majority of Congress
Not
that
very
can actually
often.
agree on anything? And this is ludicrous. I think the laws do need to be updated, the statutes, absolutely, to fit modern technology, but they need to be streamlined, and not we don't need to be imposing these old smokestack regulations on the internet.
Right. And so if there's this large bipartisan majority, I mean, is the FCC going to listen to the courts in the majority, or are they, because to be honest, when you read stuff out on the internet, it looks like they are very determined to get this through one way or the other. They are going to sort of, it's reminding me of the Obama administration, as much as I hate to make that comparison. So do you think they're going to continue to pursue this anyway, even though they're sort of being waved away?
Thus far, they're still pursuing it. Now, there are some talks going on with stakeholders, broadband network operators, as well as application providers like Google or eBay and some others, and consumer groups and such. And there are talks on the Hill, and there are talks at the FCC. So if there can be a framework agreed to that would lead to legislation, some sort of alliance to propose legislation, does that mean the FCC stops with the Title II, what we call Title II classification, classifying it as phone service? That remains to be seen. I think that would have to be part of a deal that all the stakeholders would have to agree to. So there's a chance, to answer your question, there's a chance that we could still avoid this, but I'm, just instinctively, I'm just not that optimistic.
Okay, and I guess finally, is there anything that the general public can do? Besides, do we just keep calling our congressmen and our senators? Is there any other way to influence the FCC? Do we go up there and protest them? What can we do?
Absolutely take advantage of your First Amendment rights if you feel strongly about this, and write your members of Congress, write the FCC. You can go to fcc.gov. There is a blog set up there as well. Broadband.gov. Just go to the FCC.gov website, and you can find where you can put your own public comments there. Come visit us. Schedule meetings with the commissioners. Okay. That's what we're there for. We're paid for by you, the American taxpayers. So come and tell us what you think.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning, Paulie. Do you have anything you want to ask?
I have a question from the chat room at FTRradio.com. We've got a good team of technical folks. You got Metal Babe here, who is a tech geek. I'm a tech geek myself. I've worked for SBC back in the day before it was AT&T, and I work for a major hosting company. So bandwidth is an issue.
Sure.
There's questions around quality of service, and I'm going to try and get this right. This is from Tom in North Carolina. QoS is a mechanism to set priority for packets so that video or VoIP go first and email fills in the gaps. So quality of service for listeners is dictating what packets go where, but it can also be set to affect a particular source. How do you write a regulation that differentiates between those two, the quality of packets versus the source where they come from?
That person, Tom in North Carolina, a very perceptive question. That's part of the problem. The regulations just can't keep up with technology. This is something, by the way, myself and Commissioner Meredith Atwell Baker on the FCC, we're both Republicans, and the majority of what we do at the FCC is not partisan. But this one seems to fall along partisan lines. But ironically, because what we're doing is actually defending Clinton-Gore administration policy, which is hands off the internet. So, and they got it right, and you have to give credit where credit is due. It's, I think, virtually impossible for those laws to keep up with technology. And what happens then is the competitors in the marketplace will use those ambiguous laws that we were talking about earlier and the litigation component, administrative litigation component, as a competitive weapon, both a sword and a shield. And so you can try to game the system, distort the market by using litigation to slow down your rival. What happens to us a lot of times is it's not that we're picking industry over consumers, like some people want to believe. It's companies will come to us and say, please regulate my rival. My rival's running so much faster than I am. Could you please regulate them? And in this case, one can make the argument that there are application providers out there that are doing just that, that they're worried that broadband providers might be offering more applications. Now, the ostensible fear is that if they control the pipe and the application, that then they can act in an anti-competitive way, but we just talked about how we can avoid that.
That's
exactly.
Right. And also another question I get asked from my non-technical friends, as tech folks, we all become the tech support for our family. Right. My PC's down, my network's not working. There's a lot of fear out there about Obama, quote-unquote, shutting down the internet for emergency purposes. And I try to explain to folks that's technically quite difficult to do when you truly think about the technology involved. So can you address that briefly and maybe talk about what happens if the worst happened, they somehow shut the internet down? You'd be shutting down e-commerce, ATM machines, cell phone networks, et cetera. So can you address that, the rumors, the myths of taking control and shutting down for emergency purposes?
Right. So the president has an executive order out there from last year that would allow him in an extreme emergency to have the government basically take control of the internet. Right. Is kind of the best way to simplify it. You're absolutely right there. From an engineering perspective, how does that work?
I have no idea. It's a switch.
Exactly. There's no on-off switch sitting around for the internet. There's no one, building where it's all resides. That's the beauty of it. It's redundant. It's a plethora of networks that are interconnected, a network of networks. So I'm not sure how that actually would work, but I don't want to find out. Hopefully that'll never happen.
Absolutely. Well, we are here live at Right Online with FCC Commissioner Robert McDowell. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit us. We'd love to have you on again. I know that Metal Dave's got the show every week. She talks tech. We've got our own tech advisor of the Stars, Melanie Hall. We've got Mike G out in Texas. We've got a lot of tech folks here that are politically active. And as our grassroots movements go and technology interlopes more and more into our lives, it would be great to have access to a resource such as you out there fighting for the good causes. We'd love to talk to you again sometime.
I'd love to. Thank you for having me. I love radio. It was my first love, and my mother always told me I had a great face for radio. So, anytime you want me, I'm happy.
You want to sound out?
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning while I spoke with Robert McDowell from the FCC, and we will talk to you guys soon.